Hello and welcome back to the next section here at the Federation Conference 2021. I hope you had a nice lunch. Busy one this afternoon. Police recruitment during a pandemic. What could be simpler? We'll get to our panel and we'll meet our guests in a few moments. But first, have a look at this.
It's true to say that during the current uncertain and challenging times that the nation and indeed the world have faced, that the Police Service of England and Wales has operated at pace, it's operated professionally, it's responded and reacted well to the circumstances that it's found itself in. And it's done that with all the best of intentions. But what we can't deny and what we need to ensure is mitigated against going forward is the impact and the consequences that the last year or so may have had on our members, on our officers, and therefore on the service that's been provided to the public. Young in-service officers have, like many others really, they've been forced into learning at times remotely and independently. They've been taught online. They've been learning in a virtual way. So what effect has this had on their development? What effect has this had on their understanding? How has this affected their confidence? And how has this influenced the way that they've developed?
The Uplift provides a fantastic opportunity to invest into policing, to growing by March 2023 by an additional 20,000 officers. And with that comes extra funding that, again, fantastic opportunities to invest in frontline supervisors, sergeants, inspectors, and additional training. But that 20,000 is actually recruiting 53,000 staff with officers that leave. And that brings opportunities to bring in new skills, new talent into the organisation to complement the existing experience that's already there. But it also brings that opportunity to accelerate our ambitions around workforce representation so that we represent the communities that we serve.
Police and recruits have faced socially distancing workplaces. How has this impacted on their foundation in what is actually a job like no other? Student officers have policed empty streets. They've patrolled uncongested road networks. They've policed town centres with no nighttime economy to speak of. These things have been missing, but they will undoubtedly return.
Everybody's had challenges this year with Uplift and COVID. They've been personal and they've been professional. And the same challenges that you've seen operationally, we've seen within the programme. So we've had to adapt. We've gone from what's been a very sort of hands-on and very face-to-face contact recruitment process to an online process. We've had to go to virtual recruiting events rather than boots on the ground in communities. We've had to look at the training as well through the universities, and that's very much gone online. But we've tried to respond within Uplift. We've looked at investing across forces in training for 600 people, in supporting them in tutoring and training online, and we've looked to adapt as best that we can.
But will our newest and predominantly what will be our front line be match fit to deal with them returning circumstances? Well, I mean, we've got to hope that they are.
And that adaptation has actually brought challenges, yes, but it's brought opportunities. The online assessment that we see now is actually having less adverse impact on our Black minority ethnic communities that are applying for the force. And so actually we're seeing better results through that as well. So what's been a challenge has actually been an opportunity as well. It's been fantastic that we've been supported by not only the Federation, who we meet on a monthly basis, but by staff networks. We have a stakeholder group that meets monthly, and actually being online has meant that we've had over 30 people every month around the table helping us to co-develop and co-design what we're doing, and also sharing their experiences so that we can tackle some of the barriers to attraction.
Now, we understand generally that virtual means online. It means computer. It means something digital. But virtual also means not quite. It means nearly. It means almost. So has the virtual experience for our members, for new in-service officers, been nearly taught things, almost learnt, and not quite developed? Well, only time will tell. And if that is the case, it isn't the officer's fault, and it should be acknowledged as that.
So let's meet our panel on this section. We have Helen Ball, Joe Noakes, Gemma Fox, Ken McGuinness, Emma Williams, and Dave Bamber is also with us as well. Let's start, Helen, if we could, Assistant Commissioner at the Met, of course. I mean, one assumes the Met being a force the size that it is, this would have had particular resonance with you guys.
Yeah, enormous resonance. I'm really proud to be the person who's ultimately accountable for our learning and development in the Met. Dave said that he thought policing had responded and reacted well during the pandemic, and I'm going to go further. I think policing has been extraordinarily brilliant during the pandemic at all levels and everyone involved, from our volunteers through to everybody in the organisation. And particularly, I think, our recruits who've come into a really uncertain world with a lot of change and have shown themselves to be resilient and full of courage. So I was thinking the other day that policing and learning and development have kept the show on the road, and that would have been hard enough in pandemic. But we've kept the show on the road in pandemic and during growth. And we've kept the show on the road in pandemic and during growth and during the biggest transformation in recruit training that has been in ages. And I'm sit here moved and proud by what we've achieved. The Met has joined 3,000 people as new recruits through all sorts of different pathways since the pandemic began. We've managed to go online with most of our training, and I think to keep our standards high. We haven't missed an intake, and we haven't had any outbreaks of COVID. We have transformed both our learning in the initial stages, but perhaps more importantly, when our recruits go out onto their BCUs, we've invested enormously in tutor constables to give a good ratio of tutors to PCs, and in making sure that not only do they do coach patrols at the start, but they rotate through different roles and have different experiences. And all of that, I think, adds up to more than hope with me, but some certainty that actually our recruits will respond really well to policing changing as lockdown eases. There is evidence of that at the moment. Of course, it's something that we have to be really vigilant around, and so we're alert to any signs that actually some of them haven't been able to learn in the way that they needed to, or haven't got the experience that they needed. But so far, I'm really confident that actually we've got great quality recruits, as we always have, and they're doing well.
Let's bring Gemma in on this. Gemma, you're National Roads Policing Lead on this. I know you've got a question you want to throw in as well.
Yeah, and I've got, just before I come to the question, I just wanted to kind of really say that I think our new recruits have been nothing short of commendable throughout this pandemic. I think when you actually look at the crux of it, we've asked these new officers who have come straight brand new into the service to pick up a uniform, put that uniform on and go out there and police in the midst of a global pandemic where there is the threat of a virus, the threat of catching that virus, taking it home to the family and loved ones. And they've done it. They've got on, they've done the training, which we know is tough in its own right, let alone, as I say, with that fear. So for me, I just want to say it's nothing short of commendable there. But now I suppose moving on to kind of my question, but it was more looking at, it's a question directly to Helen Ball, really. Do you think there's been any change to the age profile of new recruits over this last year or over the kind of the course of the pandemic? And has this had any effect on recruitment?
I think there's a bit of a myth about the age profile. There always has been. And some people certainly would be surprised, I think, to know that certainly talking for the Met, the average age of our joiners at the moment since January has been age 27. And we're joining people from ages of 19 up to 54. So I don't think that that's a great change from our age profile from before now. And since we have now opened up our degree apprentice route in, I think if it's a change at all, then the previous age of joining would have been even higher on average. I think, we're joining people with life experience. There's no two ways about it. Even our degree apprentices are coming in from fields like the prison service, teaching, as teaching assistants. We've had community volunteers, a real range of people, but they're all coming in with life experience, and that's really good to see.
Kim, let's bring you in on this. Geographically a different region. You're Northumbria, of course, as the PCC. Does your experience of recruitment over the last period during this pandemic, does it reflect that of what Helen said, or is it a different story?
No, I think what Helen said actually chimes perfectly well, despite the geographical differences. Probably couldn't be any further away from Helen and still be policing and still be working in policing in England and Wales. But it's the force have adapted incredibly well, and I think that goes for both the response on the ground, but also I've been really pleased with the progress that they've made against bringing new recruits into the force. A smaller number, 533, but that's still huge with the comparative force sizes, and the way that they've adapted the course material to be able to be delivered blended between online and face-to-face. And actually, certainly one of the things I make sure I do as a PCC is go and meet them on day one along with the chief, and we talk to new recruits and get the chance to ask and answer questions. And I think going back to what Helen said about the mix of experience and bringing in life experience, I actually think there are probably joiners in Northumbria who may not have considered putting that application in if it hadn't have been for the pandemic. I think it's made people reevaluate, and certainly we saw with sickness rates and absence rates, actually at the beginning of the pandemic, they dropped because police officers naturally want to respond to crisis. And I think a lot of people have found or have thought really long and hard about what kind of job they want to do. And I definitely think that that's added to the recruitment pool.
I'll come to Emma in a second. Joe, from the College of Policing, just give us a perspective from your angle on all of this.
So I would say that the Uplift programme provided us a really good infrastructure to respond to continue to recruit during the pandemic, because we were already well on our way and set up as a national programme with College of Policing, MPCC and Forces working really well together to already try and achieve what was an ambitious 20,000 uplift over 3 years from the outset. Because we had that infrastructure in place when the pandemic hit, whilst we obviously had to adjust things very quickly, for example, turning all our recruitment online, the infrastructure that was in place really supported us to do that. And actually, we've seen that sometimes through necessity, you can get really great innovation. So I don't think we would have ever thought that in a matter of weeks we could go from recruiting face-to-face to online. I think we did that in a 6-week period. We had to do that. And actually, that's really, we've had some real benefits from it. Jeanette mentioned in the VT at the beginning, we've seen less of a diversity difference with those ethnic minorities doing better in the online assessment process than they have in previous processes. So the innovation has led to some really great things happening across the service, and the structure of the programme has enabled us to do some of those things very quickly. But, without doubt, bringing in 50,000 officers over 3 years and a pandemic on top of it brings a number of challenges that we are all working together to try and meet so that we can absolutely maximise this opportunity.
Interesting. There's quite a lot of synergy, of course, between what many of you are saying. Let's bring in Emma Williams. Research is all about what you do. What does your research tell you?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, it's very positive and encouraging to hear both Kim and Helen talking about the kind of positive nature around the learning and development during this time, because it is often something that perhaps gets left behind amongst police officers. Learning and development is sometimes not seen as a priority area. It can be seen as an abstraction, which is really wrong. I think for me, in terms of the L&D and the new police constable degree apprentice officers, they've obviously lacked perhaps an opportunity to really blend their learning that they've had in the classroom into some of the actual practical real life events that they will experience in their day-to-day roles. And, you know, I think the blended nature of academic content that they're getting through their university experience, alongside the craft knowledge that they'll gain from their tutor constables and their peers, is really, really important. So for me, it just highlights the real importance of getting the role of the tutor constable right. I don't think the implementation of the tutor constables across the country has been consistent. Which is certainly shown up in research that we've been involved in, and indeed would like to do more at the Centre for Police Research and Learning at the OU. But I think the key role of those officers in this process is absolutely vital, especially when your new recruits aren't getting the exposure to some of that operational experience that will help them contextualise their learning in real life.
Here's a quick, let's bring some questions in here, because there's quite a lot of questions that have come in on this. This in from Paul, who says, the government has set a target for police services across the UK to increase the cultural diversity of optics of policing the communities before setting national figures for recruiting persons from underrepresented groups. Number one, what government research was done to suggest that policing was a career choice for those hard to reach groups? And number two, what was the rationale behind formulating the percentage in regards to recruiting from hard to reach groups? If I can go to you, Helen, I know you're not a politician, but it probably feels like that sometimes. I mean, what is your response in that respect that Paul raises of those hard to reach groups? And can we hear Helen? I think we might have just lost Helen. We will get Helen back. Can I put that to you then, Gemma, just to respond to the same question?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's difficult for us as a federation because we naturally are there to respond to the decisions made by government and those decisions by politicians and the college and various policies that are set. And as I say, I think it would actually be really interesting to hear from Helen and Jo, even Jo from the college. I know Jo's shaking her head there. But as I say, it's definitely for us. We as the Fed are responding to that, and we will support anyone from any background into the service, and recruitment must be for everyone, and that support must be there. But as I say, in terms of policy and how things are set, I definitely would look to the government and to senior leaders to answer that question.
Yeah, let's bring in a senior leader. We've got Helen back with us. Did you catch the question, Helen, before we lost you?
I did catch the question, thank you. I'll just speak for the Met, though, if that's okay.
Of course.
The Met has long wanted to have a police service that represents London's communities better than we have been historically able to do. So we've had recruiting policies in place to both increase the number of our minority ethnic officers and to increase the number of our female officers, because we weren't reflective of London in either case. The events of the pandemic, the murder of George Floyd, the response to that, the protests, and have really, I think, helped us to think even further, more strongly, more deeply about the importance of that reflection. So we have reset our own ambitions for recruitment. We're focusing even more on recruiting people from Black communities into the Met. And we are working with those particular communities direct and also through our universities, our volunteer police cadets and so on, to bring in people into policing and to accelerate the rate at which we will be able to reflect London better.
Is there anything, sorry to just talk across you for a second, Helen, but is there anything in the numbers at the moment that suggests an additional problem in that area? You mentioned George Floyd, the BLM protest. You know, for some, there was a perception of a sort of recalibrating of that relationship between some ethnic communities and the police. Has that shown up in either way in terms of recruitment?
I think it's shown up in both ways. For some people, it's something that has, if you like, hardened a resolve that they don't want to be in policing, and for some that they don't want to be working with us in any way. But for many, it has hardened a resolve that actually they do want to join the organisation. They want to support policing to be able to deliver really good, strong and effective policing across all communities. And people are coming forward and saying, actually, I really want to be part of this. And particularly those who know us, so our volunteers, our police cadets, are absolutely steadfast in saying, yeah, we want to be part of the organisation and we want to stay policing with you.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of numbers and percentages overall, I mean, I understand the Met does, you know, as you alluded to, Helen, it's not perfect and there's lots of work to do, but across the board and across the world in comparative police forces, I understand the Met does rather well.
We think we do pretty well, and our ambitions are even stronger.
Yeah.
But, you know, our intakes since January have been just under 30% from minority ethnic groups and about 40% female overall. So we are showing signs of progress, I think.
Okay. Joe, can I bring you back to the original question then about that issue that was raised there by Paul? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say we, and if I use the we at the moment for the college and the NPCC part of the Uplift programme, I think we see it as a really positive thing that the government are recognising the importance of bringing people from a whole range of different backgrounds and communities into policing. And whilst there aren't any targets as such, it's very much an ambition of the Uplift programme that we maximise the opportunity that we've got, 50,000 new officers over a 3-year period, so that policing can really represent the communities it serves. Obviously, as Helen's spoken about, the Met have got really big ambitions, quite rightly, in this area, and we have for the programme nationally as well. And I think we in policing see it as a good thing that the government are also supportive of that.
Yeah. How does that, Kim, how does that pan out in Northumbria? Because, of course, it's not anywhere near such a diverse area. It's nobody's fault. It's just geographically, that is how Northumbria looks, certainly at the moment. I mean, how is that reflected in recruitment in your neck of the woods?
Yeah, and you know, our recruitment, you know, standing in front of those rooms of new recruits, they look ever more diverse, and that is only a good thing, certainly as a PCC. And I know that I can speak on behalf of PCCs with both the major political parties on this. Everybody wants to see our police better reflect our communities, and it's something that historically policing hasn't done so. And I think what we're finding, though, and I think we have to be very honest about this, and I accept great results in the Met, but the vast majority of us are finding that our uplifting the number of women into the forces is going very well, but actually uplifting Black minority ethnic candidates is going less well. And I think that's nothing to do with the recruitment or the recruitment campaigns. That's to do with policing, and it's to do with the image of policing, and it's to do with police's relationship with those communities. It's to do with what people expect from policing. It's cultural. There's a whole range of issues that we have to break down and tackle and speak to. And certainly one of the conversations as a PCC that I'm having locally, and then also on the workforce side nationally, is about how we have more visible BME leadership in policing, how we open the doors to those careers, how we make it so that people who want to have a career in policing, who come from a less traditional background, are advocated for and brought through and made to feel valued. And so I think that this is something that absolutely has to happen. It's an important aim that we have it, but we have to be realistic that the levers that we use to tackle it have got to be much more widespread than simply a good recruitment campaign.
Okay. Here's a question from Keith, who says a huge amount of brilliant, talented and experienced officers are leaving early during their service and we're losing a lot of experiences. Shouldn't forces be doing much more to retain officers, as surely that will ease up the pressure on recruitment? Gemma, can I bring you in on that question?
Yeah, and this is something myself and Dave Bamber have been working really hard to kind of understand what that picture looks like around retention. And we're really keen as a federation to work with some of the academics. And I know, Emma, you're on this call as well. And we've spoken to various academics and researchers about retention and what are those reasons why people are choosing to leave the service early. We know that there are various pinch points across policing in terms of people's career, whether that is within their probation, whether that's in within the 7-year period, or whether it's actually now later on that officers are now choosing to make a change of job and go down a different route. But we really need to understand the reasons why. I think we can assume that we know that the reasons why people are leaving the service in terms of pay, in terms of morale, demand, etc. But I think we really need to go a bit deeper into that to understand, because if we don't understand from the people that are leaving or the people that can vocalise and explain exactly what it's like on the front line, chief officers won't be able to make that change, or we won't as the federation be able to make that calls to chief officers to say, look, this has to change, we've got to make those changes. Because you are right there, and Keith's right in what he says there, actually that potentially could ease up on some of the issues around recruitment. So as I said, I think there's lots more that can be done and should be done around retention.
Yeah, and I know John Apter has taken this issue directly to the Home Secretary, who said that she will look into it. So, I mean, that is often a wait and see moment, but we can only wait and see. Here's a question from David, who says, why was the decision not made for the College of Policing to take on responsibility for training all new officers? Surely this would have ensured consistency across all forces and enabled officers to see the college as their main source of research. And naturally, I'm bound to throw that to you, Jo.
Yes, thank you. So I'm actually not aware of that being discussed at any point as being an option. But what we have done, as I'm sure most people will be aware, is completely overhauled the training for new recruits in recent years, and we have the new entry routes now, where the college is responsible for setting that standard and the curriculum and supporting forces to deliver that locally. And I think it's still felt by policing that that's the best way of doing it, having central, consistent standards and a curriculum, which the wider service and staff associations, the Federation included, have been involved in developing, and then that is delivered locally by forces so it can be tailored to their specific needs as well, rather than being kind of the central training schools that there used to be many, many years ago.
Yeah, can I get a word from you on that as well, Emma?
Yes, indeed. I think I agree with Jo. I think the curriculum was developed in partnership with academics and the college, and the hope was that it would be commissioned out to various universities by local forces for them to deliver the PCDA curriculum. I think the problem is, and I will always raise the problem, I'm sorry, is that there is obviously some inconsistency across the country around how the curriculum is being developed, and I wonder if there might be some perhaps better relationships or oversight between the local forces and what the university are actually doing in terms of delivery. Certainly anecdotally from the forces I visited during research, there's some areas that seem to be doing this really well, and having blended learning approaches like you allude to, Kim, which are really useful, and others perhaps who kind of teach a very academic-driven, content-based approach in the classroom, but don't necessarily have the talent in the room to enable officers to put that into actual context. So I do think the curriculum development was the right thing to do. I totally agree that universities and local forces should work together to make sure that they're fit for purpose for the local area and the local context. But I think in terms of the actual delivery and content of the curriculum, perhaps there needs to be a little bit more oversight or governance around how that's actually done.
Yeah. Interesting question from Teresa here. I joined when I was 38 years old, 11 years ago. I'm not intelligent, but have incredibly, I'm sure you are, but have incredibly strong people skills and a vast amount of life experience, which makes me a good officer. However, I would not be able to join now because I've not got the education needed. Also, the thought of doing a degree with 3 teenage boys would actually put me off. I fear that having to have or do a degree will deter people like me or make it impossible for them to join. I mean, Helen, on that point, I mean, it's an issue of controversy, isn't it, in terms of what qualifications should be. It has changed over the years, as Teresa reflects in that question. But what do you make of that? Teresa says her career would simply not happen if she was to apply today.
I think I'm going to have to disagree with that. I think we would absolutely want to recruit Teresa, and we would talk to her about how she manages coming in on the degree apprentice programme in such a way that she can actually achieve it. So we certainly have part-time entry routes, and which can take you through the programme, and we can give a great deal of support to people who are coming in that way. And what I would really hope and I think see is that Teresa could join us. She would be paid as a police officer and go through her learning and be supported that at the end of her degree programme, she would be a fully fledged police officer, experienced using all those great people skills, and she'd have a degree qualification at the end of it. So I hope that it is still possible.
Does that feed in then to the wider question, do you think, Helen, of trying to recruit minority ethnic groups as well, who might have had disadvantages in terms of education? Statistically, that's often borne out and therefore might be put off for the very reason that Teresa has just highlighted. How do you penetrate that message?
I think there's a risk that many people might be put off at thinking, certainly all of us have to bust the myth that you have to have a degree to join the police, because that's really dangerous, because people will start to think, actually, policing's not for me because I don't have a degree. Whereas, in fact, we have this amazing degree apprentice programme where you can get your degree and be paid and learn to become a police officer at the same time. So I do think it's important that we support people coming into the service through these new routes. We work with our universities that if people don't have formal qualifications, there's ways of just testing and checking that they will be able to cope with the degree programme, and then we bring them in. Some people it won't be for them, but to be honest, those people won't thrive in policing because it does take great communication skills, great written skills, good problem solving, and great people skills. And you do have to have all of those different types of intelligence to thrive and be a good police officer.
Yeah, but it is interesting, isn't it? You speak to a lot of people and they will say things like, well, you need a degree to be a cop these days, a degree to do this. There is. So you're saying that is demonstrably false, that you have to
demonstrably false, and it's dangerous if that myth carries on.
Yeah. It's interesting to clarify that, though, that there are people who still, even within the service, still actually believe that. Here's a question about online training from Suzanne. Online training does not capture every recruit's learning style and misses opportunities to identify development issues at an early stage, which then creates learning and development issues when officers are on area. I fear this will not be fully appreciated until we are in crisis. Do you think, Kim, there is an issue there if people have been learning online, as much of that has been of late, of course, that there is a price to pay going forward, which I think is the spirit of the question, Kim?
I think that there's, I think there's an argument for the fact this question is better answered by one of my operational colleagues, actually, because they're obviously going to be more adept at designing and understanding the purpose of the actual course material. But certainly from an oversight and an accountability point of view, I think what I've observed, certainly in Northumbria, is that blended model, that has been quite closely and carefully considered. I think we're in a very difficult situation in a pandemic, right? This is what we're having this conversation for. There's only limited that you can do, and it wouldn't be good for the service, for the new recruits, for the trainers, for the force to have 80 people in a classroom in close quarters all day, every day, if it's avoidable. And so it gives an opportunity to use new technologies. But I do think that those outcomes and the assessment and the relationships between trainers and recruits needs to be monitored quite closely. And I think we just have to trust that we have professionals who've considered those things. But it is difficult.
And just to put that to you, Gemma, if I could, I mean, just to clarify, if there are people, non-police people, happen to be looking at this, look, you're not going to suddenly apply to join the police, fill out a few forms online, and then turn up at a police station and be put into a driving seat of a police car. We can categorically say that's not going to happen, right?
No, and there's kind of two parts really I want to kind of focus on really with that question, because it's a really good question that we as the Federation, we understand why things have been done in a blended approach with learning, virtual training, because we're in the midst of this global pandemic and an emergency situation. But what I think we need to understand though is the long-term impact and effectiveness that that's going to have through a meaningful evaluation of the training in that virtual and blended arena before we in policing accept that as the norm, because otherwise what we'll do, we don't want it to become an efficiency tool for forces, to use it to save money, to do that online learning. It's a much easier resource for forces to use. We need to remember what the core principle is here that we're trying to achieve with recruitment and learning and development. It's about developing staff and ensuring that those officers who might have additional needs, require support, that they've got that there. So, as I say, we as the Fed are always asking for a full evaluation process of online and virtual. We're not saying we're against it. What we're saying is that if we are going to utilise it in the long term, we need to understand the effects that it's going to have in developing and supporting our staff and our members. But also as well, going kind of in that long term as well, to support officers through the rest of their careers. Again, we need to make sure it's fit for purpose and that they have got the right skills then to continue through with the rest of their career. But as I say, it's a really good question. It's something we have definitely been pushing around that.
Here's one from Brett who says, could I ask the Assistant Commissioner how the intake of part-time officers is going, and if it's enhanced our offer to people who may not have previously considered policing? And it's an interesting one, that, Helen, isn't it? Because we talk a lot about flexi time and how the workplace has changed over the last year. It was kind of changing anyway, and the requirements and the pressures on different shift systems has always been there for a debate for absolutely decades, of course, in policing. But a great question there about part-time policing, and what's your response to that?
I think the take-up shows that people are interested in joining in that route. So we've had some applications from people who would not have joined if they couldn't have a part-time route. We've had tiny intakes so far, partly because we've changed to the new entry routes midstream, and we're still working out how to give our part-time route with the new entry routes. And of course, the pandemic has held up some of that work. However, it's clear that route is valued. We have had people join on the part-time route. And having completed their training, they then continue as part-time officers, which is more retentive of them. So we offer a 60% part-time option right from the start of training, right the way through into coming on and being a fully fledged police officer.
Is there a rethink needed in this area, do you think? Is this actually a bigger conversation about what the landscape of the workplace will look like in terms of part-time, full-time, flexi time?
I'm not necessarily a rethink, but certainly, yes, the acceleration of flexibility. And police forces, I think, putting themselves in the shoes of potential joiners or indeed their existing staff, and really thinking through what more can we do to make life easier for people. We were talking about retention earlier. One of the things the Met research showed us was that women who had their second baby were very unlikely to return to policing. And we've worked hard on that and indeed managed to change the maternity leave criteria nationally because of that piece of research. And I think we need to just keep hearing from the experiences of Federation members and from the ideas of people and from what we see ourselves to look at what does it take to bring people in and retain them and still make use of their great skills in policing.
Here's a question that comes from James. Says this one's for Joe. Does the college understand the pressure, the uplift and recruitment during the pandemic is putting on frontline and more specifically tutors? Some of our tutors are managing 2 to 3 students at once, and with nighttime economy coming back online, it makes me concerned about officer safety. Surely we need to manage the flow better. Over to you, Joe.
Yeah, thank you. So across the Uplift programme, so college and forces, we absolutely recognise the important role that tutors play, and the fact that we've got more people coming into policing, therefore we need more tutors. We've done a lot of work over the last year and are continuing to do that in terms of making it really clear what the role of a tutor is, helping forces to attract and support people into that role, and we're continuing to do that. We've also developed further learning packages and training for tutors over the last year. So we absolutely get that bringing more people into policing will have an impact on tutors, and we're working with forces to provide more support for them. They play a really important, vital role. It's also a really good way of getting some development for themselves, and we want to make sure that they benefit from that.
And just to go back to that issue of recruitment and diversity within recruitment, I mean, Emma, here's a question, excuse me, that comes from Zoe. Many forces have not been able to meet their BME recruitment targets. Are those targets unachievable? It's a good question.
It's a really good question, and I'm afraid I'm not a believer in targets particularly. I think they can have some perverse outcomes, to be honest, and I don't really think it's the way to go. And I know there are some forces, including the Met actually, who have got a really good learning style around their recruitment processes, so they have an opportunity for people who go through the process to actually give feedback on their perceptions of the recruitment stages, and I think that sort of learning, much more kind of iterative approach to recruitment is much more healthy, to try and make improvements and to set hard and fast targets around it. You know, this is about learning and listening to people who go through the process, and then changing your strategy or your policies around it to suit the needs of different communities. And I know the Met have done quite a lot on this over recent months, and I don't know, Helen, if you've evaluated that process, but certainly it sounds from what I've heard from people who have been through it and be involved in it, that it's a really positive approach to a learning style around recruitment to try and encourage more diversity within policing. I don't think setting targets around these issues is always going to be the answer. Whilst I understand the need to increase, I don't think doing that alone is enough.
Helen, do you want to just respond to that?
Yeah, thank you. I think the great thing about the college is it doesn't just sort of sit there and set a standard. It really comes out and talks to police forces, works with us, and we learn together. So you're quite right. The Met with the college have been doing innovative things in our recruitment process and evaluating as we go. And that's affecting what's being put in place nationally by the college. We don't have targets either. I agree that targets I think are risky. We do have very strong ambitions, and I think we've got a commissioner and a board at the moment that where we feel that if we don't aim high, we won't get anywhere. So we're aiming high on recruitment, and I think we are starting to see that things are changing.
Yeah. What's the difference between an ambition and a target? Is an ambition a kind of unwritten target?
No, I don't think so, because if you have a target, then people kind of watch you and see if you've reached it or you haven't. And so you tend to set a target that you actually know that you can probably reach. An ambition, you can actually set it much higher, and then you can be really ambitious in trying to reach it. But if you don't reach it, well, it wasn't a target, and the consequences are not quite as bad.
And we're pretty much out of time, but I want to just bring Dave Bamber in, and Dave has been watching and listening patiently, and which was the whole point of Dave being here at this session, to kind of observe what was being said. But on this point, as we almost hit the end of this session, Dave, firstly, what are you making of what you've heard, and what are your views over the overarching point about recruitment over the last 12 months?
From what I've heard, and to be honest with the speakers that we've got, I'm always reassured by the intentions strategically of the likes of Joe, Helen, Kim, Emma and our own Gemma, I'm always reassured by their intentions with the honest belief that it's towards a better policing. The issue then comes down to implementation a lot of the time, and this is where I think we need to be aware as the Federation and policing as an organisation. We just heard a question that referenced multiple students to one tutor. Well, that's never right. We've heard about online learning, people coming in as an online process and then receiving online training. Well, that's not right either, that they've not got that exposure to policing. I understand why it's happened over the past 12 to 18 months. I understand that the people on this panel have the best of intentions and the best of thoughts around resolving them issues. My concern is, one of the beauties of British policing is 43 police forces. One of the disadvantages as well is 43 different police forces. And so the implementation can be varied at best, chaotic at worst. And so that level of standardisation, so a bigger drive from the college, a bigger drive from the MPCC to ensure that every officer in all 43 forces have that same opportunity to develop, have the same opportunities that we've heard the panel say they want them to have.
Good work. Dave, thank you for finishing and concluding that session, Dave Bamber. Our thanks also to Helen Ball, Joan Oakes, Gemma Fox, Kim McGuinness and Emma Williams. Thank you to them, and thank you to all of your great questions as well. I think we got through most of them. Apologies if there were one or two that we didn't. We are going to take a short pause. We're back with talking protests in a few moments. John Apter, the National Chair, back with us on that. It's been a hugely contentious issue over the last 12 months, and we'll have that and again your questions. Go online and get that question in through to the next section. 15 minutes time. We'll be right back here and we'll see you then.